Hi, everyone, and welcome to Godot Community. I'm Lillian Gina Quinones, and I'm your high school theater PLC leader. Today, we're wrapping up the school year by talking about reflection and planning. I've divided each one of my talking points into two sections. One is guiding questions, and the other one is about methods or techniques or approaches. So we're going to start talking today about ways to approach reflection. And if you were to ask me what the first thing that comes to my mind when I think reflection, it's usually the question, with what time? With what time? We're theater teachers. We work in our sleep. And especially as we're approaching the end of a school year, there are just so many boxes to check off on our to-do lists that it's hard to find the time to truly slow down and reflect on our teaching practices so that we can start to make effective change or effective cementing of like the good stuff for next year. So I set as our first guiding question today, when do I set apart time for reflection? The setting apart, I believe, has to happen really intentionally and probably significantly far in advance so that you're kind of working towards this goal of being able to sit down and really kind of sit with all of what you've done throughout the school year. However, in order to get to that point, you have to have data. You have to have something that you're looking at. I think if we do it kind of subjectively or we do it from memory, it's good, but it's also more work. It's more work if I have to sit down on May 15th and create a list from scratch of all of the wonderful things that I did this year, as opposed to I have them somewhere and I'm able to go back and look at them. So my next two questions kind of work in tandem. It's how do I gather information as I go? And what is my preferred platform for organized and accessible archives? So I don't have that for you. I think everybody's different. I think we all have our version of what works for us. But what is important is if we're using a portfolio platform like Evernote, for example, that works really well for keeping videos and keeping design work and things like that. But if you're like, and I've tried those platforms, trust me, I'm not organized, I think, enough to keep track of them. So I'm a super simple Google folder girl. I throw everything in a folder, sometimes with no rhyme or reason because the year gets really busy. And then I go back and I sort through it at this time and kind of work my way through the information that I've put in there. So there are a bazillion ways to do it, but the key is how are you going to do it, what your preferred platform is, and going ahead and setting apart that time intentionally to have your reflection practice. Now, what are some reflection methods you may want to explore? The first one is student portfolios. Now, I went into a little bit of depth about student portfolios in my last webinar about wrapping up the school year with students. Student portfolios are a really great way for you to track an individual student's growth, for them to track their own growth, and for then you to see their growth. And if you have a group of 20 students that are doing student portfolios, then you can look at all of them together and gather some really valuable data about what really worked, in what ways they grew this year, or if you're doing it as part of kind of a 2-year program, for example, if you're doing a pathway and you're tracking them from 11th to 12th grade, this is a great way for you to see, okay, these are the areas where my students are just like rocking the house, and these are some of our areas of growth, right? Student feedback forms are scary, but they are very helpful. Asking them, one, making them anonymous is always a good thing. Asking them to give you feedback on your lessons, on your the way that you deliver instruction, the activities in the classroom, the extracurricular things that they're a part of in your theater program, and to give you feedback about how they feel like they learned and grew this school year, and give you feedback on what they think your areas of growth is, right? Or what they think your areas of growth are. Excuse my grammatical error. But, it's an extremely vulnerable thing. And it took me a few years before I was brave enough to create a student feedback form. But it has been very helpful, and it has helped enlighten what the student perspective is of my practice and not just mine, right? In the IB, we do something called a Viva Voce. And Viva Voce is kind of similar to maybe kind of a combo of the student portfolios and student feedback, but it's an oral feedback session. So it's a one-on-one with a student where you can ask them questions about what they thought the most valuable part of their time was in this course, what their biggest learning was, how they feel they're going to use this material in the future, what they still want to learn about, what they wish they would have done more of or would have learned more about. Viva Voce sessions require that you have a strong relationship with your students, because if they're going to trust you, if they're going to tell you about their experience authentically, they need to trust you, right? So that's something you have to plan ahead for quite a bit. Watch parties. I always include, if you've watched my webinars, I'm always including something fun. I just think celebration is so important, and it's good for the general morale of your students, but it's also good for your soul, right? Watch parties are good if you go back and watch your one act performance, or you go back and watch your musical or your TYA show, and this takes you and your kids down memory lane, and you laugh and you talk about everything that happened this year. That's a really it's a fun reflection method that is great for you all as a group and a community, but doesn't have to feel burdensome, right? Then there is journaling. If you are a journaly type of person, you could try having a self-reflection journal. And that also is going to be something that takes some kind of ahead of time, maybe not so much planning, but intentionality, so that you are on some kind of periodic level recording your thoughts, your accomplishments, things that are working in the classroom and on the rehearsal or casting or production side of what you do. And then you can have this reflection time at the end of the school year where you're looking back at those journal entries, finding patterns, finding insights from your own thoughts and from your own practices. And then the last thing that I find to be super valuable, useful, powerful, community building, enlightening, all of the above, are peer observations. Do you have someone that you trust? either in your building or outside of your building, because we are all connected digitally these days, that would be willing to swap with you some peer observations. So I give my friend a call, or I send him a text message. Hey, I'm going to record my class this week, or I'm going to record 3 of my classes. We're preparing for, we are doing some devising this week, and I'm walking my kids through the process of like getting their ideas on their feet. So I'm going to record my classes. Would you mind taking a look at it and filling out this observation form for me? I would be glad to do the same for you. And you have a friend who's willing to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly about what they see in your teaching practice. And then you can take that, put it in your think tank, and use it for, whatever you need to either pat yourself on the back for or improve in your classroom. So that is reflection methods. All right, the next thing is glows and grows. I love this. This is our trendy words, and I don't know, maybe some people may feel like they're overdone, but I just love them. I love them because they're cute, and I also feel like they're positive. So in my looking at what's successful, I'm feeling positive. But even in looking at what didn't go so well, I'm also feeling positive because it's an area of growth. So there's that growth mindset that we're asking our students to have. We are practicing it ourselves. So our guiding questions for glows and grows are: what was successful and why? And what didn't go so well that I need to adjust for next year? All right, those are pretty straightforward. So let's consider some categories that we could look at for glows and grows. Instructional delivery, that's a given, right? Did I plan my lesson well, plan my lessons well? How often did I fly by the seat of my pants? Like, real talk, right? Sometimes we're like having to pivot or change, and we're flying a little by the seat of our pants. How often did that happen this year? And how can I improve that? Did my lesson plan that I put on paper, or did my rehearsal schedule that I put on paper, did that actually translate to real life? Did it work out the same way in the flesh as it did in my dreamscape, right? And where did I have to make adjustments? You can also look at your assessment data. So you're looking at performance assessments and presentations and all of your formative and summative assessment, which, by the way, one of my April webinars was about assessment in the theater classroom. But you have somewhere where all of this assessment data lives, and you can look at what worked, what didn't work, and how you want to shift your instruction so that you're getting your students to where they need to go. You can also look at a couple of what I call intangibles: relationships, community building, and parent involvement, right? I'll go backwards. Parent involvement can be intangible, or it can be very tangible. You can go from, I had one parent running the show, to I've got a group of parent volunteers now that helped me with every production this year. That is a tangible shift. But it can also be your parent involvement could have simply changed from you have a core group of parents. You haven't been able to grow in numbers that much, but this core group of parents has now leaned in, and you have a new rapport with them. You feel more ease asking them for help. They are now taking on, one parent is the chairperson of this event, and one parent is the chairperson of all of your concessions, and they have taken projects that at one time you were actively delegating. Now they've completely taken them off your plate, and they're running with it. And they're sending you full plans, and all you have to do is give your approval. That is a glow. That is a major glow, right? Even though it feels a little intangible, that is a major move in a positive direction when it comes to your parent involvement. Community building. How is your school community and your community at large showing up for you? So that could look like more audience members in seats. That could look like more philanthropic support. That could look like more administrative support. That could look like more folks in the building, more counselors, for example, that understand what you're doing and have your back when you're making sure that the prerequisites for said course, the students have taken all of those prerequisites and they're not being scheduled incorrectly. That's community building, building a community of trust and mutual understanding, and having folks in all of the support areas knowing what your program needs from them, right? And then relationships with students is a good category to consider. How has the rapport between you and your students changed? COVID has been something that has really tested that for us. So in major shifts, we often have big moments outside of the pandemic. We often have big moments in our schools or in our communities that test our relationships. How did we navigate that? How are our students getting along with each other? Do we see that we're building a world where students are getting along? There's some of that we can't always control, but we are energy setters. We are environment setters, I think is more the phrase that I'm looking for. We set the environment for our students to exist and operate in. So how is that environment looking? Is it positive? Is it mutually supportive? All of that. And if it's not, what can I do differently? What can I do more or less of? And how can I show up for them and for me? Then, of course, there are awards and accolades. That's a given. So if you started your program, maybe you got to your school 5 years ago and it was a baby program, and y'all were doing the show in the cafetorium, and now you have a venue and you do a full show, and now you have an award or 2 awards, or you have an accolade, or the district has looked at you and said, wow, what a lovely job you're doing. Take that all into your glows and your grows, and really make sure that you're making time to reflect on that, because those are big accomplishments. And then keep track of your quantifiable growth. This is as much for you as it is for making sure that you are sustaining administrative support, district support, state support, philanthropic support. You want to be able to know where you are in terms of student numbers.
your financial picture, and then faculty and or teaching artists. So at what point will your program be able to add a teacher? If you are a many hat wearer like many of us are, how much does your program have to grow so that your school can hire a new theater teacher? Or how much do you have to grow in your financial picture so that you can get outsource some teaching artists for master classes, or outsource a designer or technician to help you with your productions? Things like that. Those are important to keep track of, important to track from the beginning, and then definitely sit with and take an honest look at the end of every school year. All right, moving on. The last thing I want to talk about today is you. You want to make sure not to forget you. So what are your personal and professional goals? Many of us ended up here because we love this medium. We love to storytell, and we are artists or storytellers in some way, shape, or form ourselves. We either have a background in theater, or we have a background in literature, or we have a background in technical theater or stagecraft or film and TV or acting. But in whatever that background is or area of passion, we have some personal and professional goals that we want to accomplish. And sometimes they take a long time, sometimes they don't happen, but sometimes they do. And we want to make sure that we are clocking them when we get to them. So, some things to do with your personal and professional goals. The first thing is to write them down early. So if you are a school year person with your personal and professional goals, make sure they're written down before the school year starts. You might be a calendar year person. So because you like to work on some of your personal goals over the summer. Some of you may be speakers at workshops, or some of you may be completing your master's degree over the summer, that kind of thing. So whichever way you organize it is fine, as long as you write it down and you visit them often, right? Visit your goals. Say, hey, goal, I'm so glad you came to my mind. You are still here. I'm working on it. Pivot as needed, right? So you may visit your goal and be like, well, that was too small. Or, oh, well, snap, it's only October and I've already met my goal of increasing my my drama club roster, or my acting class goals to a specific point. I thought it was going to take me all year. Let me pivot, right? What else do I need to put in there to continue to challenge myself? Or on the flip side, that was too much. I think I'm overextending myself. Give yourself permission to change your mind. Goal setting and moving through the professional landscape of being an educator right now it's scary. It is unpredictable. It is a lot of things that are outside of our control. So one thing that I like to tell myself is that as much as I can, approach life as a meditation and try to be the observer as much as possible, right? in order to do that, I have to resist judgment because I'm going to observe some situations, or I'm going to observe myself in situations where I wish I could have done better. And instead of pointing the finger at myself, I can resist judgment in that moment and use it as fuel for that reflection piece that we were talking about earlier. And then the last thing is celebrate yourself. Like truly, truly celebrate yourself. If nobody else is going to do it for you, maybe they will every now and then, but you celebrate yourself. And then I wrote rinse and repeat because you got to do this a lot. All right. My final thing for today is about planning for next year. What can I do at the end of the school year to ease the stress throughout the beginning of the next? A couple of potential action items that I've taken from my own personal practice. One is season selection, because it's something that I love so much, and I spent a fair portion of my summer planning for. I make sure that my season is selected for next year and that I've licensed the shows that I want to license for next year, because they might say no, right? They might say no, and I might have to revamp. So that's something that I do by the time I walk out of the building in May. The other reason that I do it is because I use this year's budget to make sure that I'm starting the next year, my budget is for the doing as opposed to the licensing of rights and things like that. We have to secure the venues in our school building. So that's another thing that I do before I walk out of the school in May, usually by about May 15th. On some ambitious years, May 1st, but usually by about May 15th. I have secured, because you need the dates for the licensing anyway, then I go ahead and secure the venue, either the Black Box Theater or the Courtyard or the main stage for our productions for next year, and the rehearsal spaces, because they're not, those are not a given either. So if I have to reserve the dance studio, I have to reserve the music room because those are rooms that other people use. So those are things that are really easy to do when my brain is kind of fried in May. Let's see. Connecting with teaching artists is a kind of connected with your season selection. I try not to build my curriculum to a point where I'm teaching around a show. I do really like to teach the craft of theater. That's a whole nother webinar. But to an extent, I want to try to build the skills that are needed for the audition. For example, if I'm doing a tap show, I might have a couple of master classes throughout the fall for somebody to come in and teach the kids how to do a couple of tap routines so that they're prepared for their dance call in November, right? Stuff like that. Then thespian leadership, that usually changes over right before the end of the school year so that the kids know who's on the thespian leadership board before the school year starts. And then finally, post-production practices. So anything that needs to be done in terms of putting away your equipment or cleaning up your scene shop or costume closet or your classroom, all of that should be things that happen for next year's planning. So that is reflection and planning. Let's do a quick little recap before we call it a day. All right. Today we talked about setting apart time for reflection and the ways that you could approach reflecting on your personal teaching practice and rehearsal and production practices. We also talked about how to look at your glows and your grows. And then we talked about personal and professional goals and some of the things that you want to think about as you are looking at and revisiting those goals. And finally, we talked about some potential action items for planning for next year. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar. Please join us on the Godot Fine Arts PLC, and as always, invite your theater teacher friends. The more, the merrier. If you want to connect more and chat about the ideas and resources I shared today, email me at liliangina.quino@apsk12.org. Thank you so much and have a wonderful summer. Bye.